Well, Vice Chair, it is 1 o'clock. You can go ahead.
All right, very good. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Metro Q Oversight Committee. First order of business would be to conduct the election of officers. And we can refer to agenda item number 2 in our packet. General manager stating that there are bylaws require that the committee conduct an annual election of officers to include a chairperson, vice chairperson. Around our discussion, Measure Q bylaws state during the first meeting of the fiscal year, committee shall elect a chair and a vice chair to serve for a 1-year term. Chair shall preside at all meetings of the committee. The vice chair shall perform the duties of the chair in his or her absence. If both officers are absent, the majority of the quorum may appoint a presiding officer for that meeting. Upon resignation of an officer, a special election of the officers shall be held. Our past chair, Sid Williams, resigned his membership on the committee. In that regard, a new chairperson must be elected. The current vice chair, myself, Bobby Merritt, has expressed willingness to serve as a chair. Committee member Stephen Macias has expressed willingness to serve as the vice chair. At this point, I would
I'll make a motion to appoint Bobby Merritt as chair of the Oversight Committee.
is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, thank you. All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Right, you want to do roll call or no?
No, that's okay. The motion
Very good.
passes.
Okay, the motion passes. Thank you. All right, we'll move on now to public comment.
Before we go on, we have to now elect the vice chair.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. I'll take a motion for vice chair.
Make a motion for Steve Macias to become vice chair of the Oversight Committee.
There's a second.
A second, I just have a question.
Sure.
So we see this is a process, so just based on the bylaws, so we don't have any comments, do we allow for public comments?
Yes.
So do we do that before you make a motion or?
No,
'Cause
We
you
do
just- No?
not have public comment on election of officers.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Okay, so I second the motion.
thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion passes. Right, we'll move on to public comment. Is there anyone that would like to address the committee at this time? Seeing none, we will move on to the consent agenda and approve the minutes of our last meeting, August 19th of 2024.
Mr. Chair, I was at that meeting and I'll make a motion to approve those minutes.
You,
I'll second that motion.
all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Having none, motion passes. At this point, we will move on to our action items. And let's see, we have review of our revenues and expenses that will be presented to us by Lisa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Lisa Reinheimer, I'm the Deputy CEO for Monterey Salinas Transit, and today I'll be going over some of the financial reporting from this past fiscal year. talking a little bit about the mobility programs and asking for your approval of a letter to the MST Board of Directors that the Measure Q funds were spent on eligible expenses. So every year we go through a process where we prepare an annual comprehensive financial report and use an independent auditor to make sure our financials are in good shape. They are in good shape. And this year, I wanted to mention specifically as we get to the 10-year anniversary of the collections of Measure Q, that the rides program and all the mobility programs that Christy Sugabo runs are fully paid for by Measure Q funds. So that's fantastic. There are about 12-ish million dollars that we collected, 12.9 million that we collected last year. But the problem is those funds do not fully cover the cost for MST fixed route. So after we pay for all of the rides, after we pay for all of the mobility programs, we pay for some of the fixed route for eligible expenses for seniors. This last year, about 14% of the passengers were seniors, and so whatever's left over from Measure Q would go to fixed route to support the seniors on fixed route, but it doesn't fully cover that amount. And we've never really asked our passengers if they're a veteran or a person with a disability, which would also be an eligible expense under Measure Q. So at this point, from 2024, there was a deficit to fully cover all eligible expenses of 2.8 million. And over the lifetime of Measure Q, the last 10 years, there's a deficit on the fixed route side of just over $8 million. Now that's an accounting issue. It's not that we can't fully fund the fixed route with other revenue sources, but it is something to think about when we're looking at the next 5 years and beyond that point. So moving on to what the Measure Q program funds specifically for the mobility program is MST rides, travel training, taxi vouchers, senior veteran shuttles, et cetera. And you have a handout showing the last 10 years of our performance and successes. So we've had over 1.2 million rides on the MST rides. That's that door-to-door services for people who can't get to a bus stop, a regular bus stop. We've had over 500 boardings on our senior shuttles, over 130 on the veteran shuttle. And we've been really active in our community in promoting the fixed route services. Over 4,600 sessions of travel training conducted, showing seniors, people with disabilities, and veterans how to use the fixed route program. We've also been successful with our vouchers and also with our trips program. This was the latest program installed for Measure Q is travel reimbursement program. You may recall this is the one where, you know, if I can't get a ride due to my whatever limitation, I can have a friend take me and the friend gets reimbursed the gas mileage for that trip. So that's been pretty successful as well. We're also planning a fun event in celebration of the 10-year anniversary of Measure Q, which will be on May 21st at our Mobility Center over in Salinas before the Senior Transit Day to celebrate all of the successes we've had with the Measure Q program. So with that, I'll stop and let you know that there is an audit letter. There's a schedule of revenues, expenses, and changes as an attachment, as well as a draft letter for the Measure Q chair to sign that would be submitted to the MST Board of Directors next month. And we've got staff here that can answer specific financial or program related questions.
Are there any questions for Lisa?
Yeah, I have a question. Thank you. Hi, Lisa, how are you?
I'm good. How are
Good to
you,
see
Dan?
you. Yeah.
Nice to see you. I'm glad
So
you're on the committee.
The 2.8 deficit, is that a normal deficit every year, about that amount that the general fund needs to
I
pick
would
up?
say it's gone up over time. Because it is a 10-year program and we're at a deficit, sort of an accounting deficit of 8.1. So it's gradually gone up over time.
And then the general fund just picks up the, whatever it cannot be paid.
Yes.
Okay, great, thanks. Thank you.
I will say, you sparked a thought. Um, so in August, we're planning on doing an in-person writer survey. We do this every 2 years, and one of the questions that we'll be asking is on the other status of an individual, not just when you were born, but do you have a disability? Are you a veteran? So we can tie that better to our budget.
That brings up another question then, sorry, thank you. So you kind of made it sound like it's a deficit to the general fund. Does Measure Q ever pay that back in any, if there's
No.
more dollars?
No, it's just an account, it's just
It's just
a
subsidized.
deficit that just kind of sits there and doesn't really have that much of an
Is there a
impact.
reason why you keep that
Yes,
deficit in?
so that we
writing?
can show committees that
Ah.
we have a deficit on this other side
I
and
see,
potentially ask the voters for an extension of Measure Q and or a slight increase.
that's it. That's the answer. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Who asked us?
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. So it's not like, it's not an actual numbers. So you're not taking out from the general fund. It's just an accounting process.
It's an accounting process.
Okay. So then with that note, then, because you are keeping track of what it really takes to run the Measure Q services, right? And the
That's
programs
exactly
and the
it.
rides. So when does a Measure Q sunset?
In 2030.
In
So the
2030.
beginning was April, when we started actually collecting was April 1st, 2015.
Okay, so then that means that we only have 5 more years. And
Yes.
so given that, I think, for me, I think some of the issues too, even within transit in the next 5 years, and given that we obviously have potentially we'll have even budgetary issues in the transit front and whatnot. So, and even though it's just for accounting purposes, how do we start? I mean, are we starting already the campaign? Are we starting already to address the possibility that we want to make sure that this funding is continued? And how do, I mean, this is great because we start doing this already to start the campaign of communications and addressing that and really looking at what areas is some of the higher need for our veterans, our seniors, our people with disabilities, so we can really start doing some of that.
Yeah.
Planning and marketing.
So Carl Sidoric, CEO for MST. Let me help Lisa out here a little bit about what's going on. So the amount, I guess we could say that the MST fixed route has eligible Measure Q expenses. We do services for veterans, for persons with disabilities, and for seniors that are not being reimbursed through Measure Q. So there is money going out for eligible services on the MST fixed route. We're just not applying any Measure Q dollars to that because we're applying all those dollars to the programs that you see before you, and we find other sources of funding. So there are expenses that are eligible for Measure Q under fixed route that we're just not covering right now, but we want to keep track of it, basically to show that the demand for these specialized services is greater than what the 1/8 of 1% is actually providing us in revenue. And since you asked about, the need for this expiring in 2030, we have legislation being put forward by Assemblymember Addis, AB 761. Will be having its first hearings in the next weeks. Local government committee and tax committees, which will allow the Measure Q sunset to expire so that we can continue to collect this longer term. It would also allow MST to seek an additional 0.1/8%. If the board, it doesn't impose a tax, but it allows the MST board to seek an additional 0.1% to be used for general MST fixed route programs and services, some of which are Measure Q eligible expenses. So it would take that current 1/8 cent and allow for an additional 1/8 cent, and it would remove that additional 1/8 cent from the countywide cap. So it would not impact any of your other local cities' ability to raise a general fund tax that hits that cap. This is a similar legislation that has been passed recently, most recently by Santa Cruz Metro under a bill supported by Senator Laird. So we're kind of coming in with that as well. So so we will have, assuming that gets passed this year, we'll have 2 runs at this, 2026 and 2028 before the 2030 expiration. And we can either just do a straight up extension of Measure Q, or we could do a Measure Q plus 1/8, and we'll let the voters tell us which one of those we think we're going to get 2/3 majority on.
Yeah.
So that's where we're at. That'll handle and how does this fit under this general counsel? This is our future finances. We are talking about financial, and this will be our next 5-year plan. Thank you.
So that is a part of Measure Q, is to pay for the fixed finances. Now, I understand now, it means that Measure Q is subsidizing the general fund.
If there are sufficient Measure Q resources that go beyond this, MST would say, well, those MST fixed route services that are for eligible populations, seniors, veterans, persons with disabilities using the fixed route, we would use those Measure Q funds to do that.
And that was a part of the Measure Q language.
It was, yeah. And early on, the first several years of Measure Q, those funds did just that. But the cost of these programs has been exceeding the revenue coming in. So we've just pushed that out, and we're the MST general fund is picking up that service, and we're just keeping these other programs going.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, committee. Let me answer these questions.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I you mentioned that you're looking at other funds to help offset these operating costs. Are there any specific funds that are addressing this target population that you've received over the past few years?
Ooh. Yeah, there's a federal program, it's called the 5310 program, that we use to purchase the vehicles with. So that covers our capital costs of the rolling stock. There are really very few and far between sources of funding for these types of services. You know, we look at Department of Health and Human Services and things like that, but we don't have anything other than Measure Q, and then our 5310 program is supporting these programs. I mean, we could look at nonprofits and things like that to help offset, grants and that sort of thing, but we just haven't found anything that's a good fit.
Yeah, I think what is important to remember is a number of years ago, the federal government took away some of the funding, the JARC and New Freedom funding that would provide services in the Measure Q category. That was one of the major reasons why Measure Q was successful, is because those funds were taken away, never replaced. So we had to, help ourselves with the funding and the Measure Q program.
Yeah, we've looked at Medi-Cal reimbursement.
Yep.
Went absolutely nowhere. We spent a lot of time working with the state and making ourselves eligible to get reimbursed for rides programs for Medi-Cal recipients, and we never saw $1 that was a good 1.5 years of paperwork that never produced. So yeah, we're really dependent on Measure Q, and then we don't want to raise passenger fares, but that's the other source, is passenger fares, and we've held passenger fares constant for a long time. I can't think of the last time we raised the fares.
Actually, we reduced them.
We reduced the fares in
As part of the
2022.
Better Bus Network.
Yeah, but who we serve are generally pretty vulnerable and financially vulnerable. And so what little we get out of the fairs, we think would have a greater negative impact on them than the financial impact would have on ourselves. So we'd find it easier to find other funding sources.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, I have a comment. First, we have to keep in mind here that this is an oversight committee and boy, it's fun to talk about policy, but that's actually the MST board that does that. However, I think that this is providing some good input for staff about as you begin to look at, should there be another Measure Q or should that Measure Q be doubled? What kind of arguments would be brought about this? What other alternatives have you looked at? All this should be brought into play. In addition to some people who are just going to oppose the tax increase. You are going to have people who say, I don't know if I want Measure Q expanded because there's a certain limit to how much we can increase taxes for all the agencies. And I want my agency to get the additional 1/8. I think it would be interesting. This looks like probably a social media type thing. I think, having standardization, for example, in how the numbers are portrayed, because you got 1.2 M and then you've got the numbers. I'd like to see a chart like that. I think those are good numbers. Probably it'd be interesting as well to see the trends over time, over the 10-year period. If I'm going to be, talking about Measure Q in the future and expanding it, I'm going to want to see, are more people riding the bus or less people riding the bus? Also, you have, for example, if the number of veterans is significantly declining, it would be something for the policy board to say, well, why is this happening when we have Measure Q funds? So these are just some things to think about, but I know that we're narrowly focused here on, was the money spent correctly? It looks to me like it certainly was, and that's something that can be reported back to the board and the voters.
Go right ahead.
I just have a final comment and thank you, Committee Member Dayton, for that comment in terms of who we are. Obviously, we are an oversight committee, but asking questions about policies and how you maintain this program, going in the future and some of the policy aspects of it, I think it's really critical. I think it's beyond just oversight, but making sure that our, especially our seniors and our residents and our persons with disability have the opportunity to continue with these programs and looking at beyond oversight. Obviously, this is what we're tasked with right now, but I think it's important for us to be able to look beyond that. But my other comment is I also want to make sure that I don't overlook this, because most of the cities, I think, throughout Monterey County also participated in the Solutions Summit through Alliance on Aging. I believe they did since last year, and there was a lot of comments, and I wanted to bring this to the Oversight Board because it isn't, and it is part of the mobility questions that they asked, and it is with seniors and persons with disability because that was our target group. And I know a lot of them reference in terms of more accessibility. Obviously, we have the programs here, but just to the point that, we have the services, is how do we look at the services that we have before us, and then some of the individuals still that are looking still for more senior shuttles to at least for some of what we heard in different communities is senior shuttles to medical appointments, social events, and hospitals. So that still seems to be a need for a lot of our seniors that are looking for transportation needs. So I wanted to make sure I brought that to the board's attention.
All right, I think you might want to bring that to our mobility committee. And because here we're looking at the numbers, as he said, but that's something that we could take up at our mobility subcommittee.
So basically there was no findings and it was a clean audit, right?
Yes.
Beautiful. Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right, on this item, we have to approve.
Before you do that, you do want to take it out to public comment?
All right, very good. Is there anyone in the public that has a comment on this item? Seeing none, we need to determine if we're going to accept the letter for the board, which is attachment 2 in our packet.
I'll make a motion that we approve the letter to the full board indicating full compliance.
Is there a second? Thank you. All those in favor?
I,
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. We'll move on to item 5.2. And receive the board reappointment of Measure Q committee member Juan Pablo Lopez to a new 3-year term. And the appointment of a new member, Ana Velasquez and Dan Albert, each to 3-year terms.
So was I on the board?
No, we're.
I mean, could I vote if I wasn't on the
So
board?
you're not voting, you're just receiving the appointment.
Oh, I see. So I was already a member of the board?
You were already
Okay.
appointed by the board at
Got
it.
last.
I get it.
meeting
Right.
or 2 meetings ago.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Everybody but Joe Amelia
I wasn't-
voted for you, so.
You did? Now I'm shocked. Okay, I get it now.
All right.
He made a big presentation.
I'm sure he did. I'm sure he did.
So this is not an action item, this is just
No.
receiving, you can
Oh, I
have
see,
comments,
okay.
you can go out to the public at this time.
Is there anyone in public that has comment? Seeing that, we'll move on. Closed session,
There's none.
no closed session. At this point, are there any members that have any comments or suggestions or?
Yes, just the usual comment I make as we're thinking about where to get money to pay for certain eligible expenditures that Measure Q doesn't collect. Always important to continue the collaboration between MST and TMC because some of the Measure X monies have somewhat similar goals, and we want to make sure that there is no redundancy or duplicate expenditures on that sort of thing. So I say the same thing at the Measure X Oversight Committee as well. We want to make sure that these two groups are working together on possible common areas of spending.
No?
Yeah, I have a quick announcement. It's my pleasure to announce that whereas we're 10 years into Measure Q, for 8 of those years, Christy Sagabo has been the manager of that department. She started here 20 years ago as a customer service rep just last month. And so I wanted to recognize Christy here formally because this is a group that she works so much with her 20th anniversary pin, 4 diamonds, and a little gift catalog. So you can tell we kept it a secret from her.
yeah.
So I just want to congratulate. She started out as a customer service rep and then quickly promoted up into the paratransit eligibility for the rides program, becoming a mobility coordinator in the early days pre-Measure Q, getting these programs off the ground and then managing these programs for 8 of the last 10 years and making them thrive and grow. And so thank you, Christy. Wanted to give you your 4-year pen. There you go. And then you get to select a gift out of this 20-year
Awesome.
catalog.
Well, thank you.
All right. I don't know if you want to share
Have
anything.
any comments?
Just want to say thank you to this board and to our MST board, along with our Measure Q Mobility Advisory Committee board, my staff, great team to work with. Thank you, Lisa, Carl, and everyone else in the leadership team. And yes, I'm just surprised. I wasn't expecting this at all. But definitely 20 years later, I'm still here at MST. So thank you.
Very good. Congratulations.
Do you have any other comments from the board? Anybody in the gallery? No. I'd like to call adjournment at 1:29.